difficult. Dr. R. Srinidhi Nityanand, MBBS, MD, DNB, MN AMS, completed his MBBS in PRC Institute of Medical Science and Research, Coimbatore. She completed MD Psychiatric in St. John's National Academy of Health Science, Bangalore. She completed her diploma from National Board from Delhi. Certified Advanced Training in Management of Addiction Disorders from NIMHANS, Perinatal Psychiatric from NIMHANS. Special areas of interest: women mental health, child and adolescent psychiatry, psychotherapy and general adult psychiatry. I would like to welcome Dr. R. Srinidhi to conduct a session on National Helper Suicide Prevention. We welcome you, ma'am.
Hello, good afternoon. Nice to see the hall full and I know some masks without masks, so nice to see a big crowd after a long time. I'm happy to be here and I'm sure after 3-4 talks you all might be a little tired. I'll try my best to keep it a little interesting. So this will be more of some things that you already know and some things which all of us are a little hesitant about. So we are all not comfortable with the topic of suicide, but I'm sure we know somebody who's attempted or who's had thoughts of suicide, or we ourselves could have had thoughts of suicide. So this is say a big elephant in the room which we cannot ignore. So this will be more skills. I will help you with some skills to help your friend, to help your neighbor, to help patients, so that you will be able to handle when you know somebody who's been thinking of suicide or who has active thoughts of suicide. At the end of the session, if you understand that, I'm more than happy. So the topic for today is natural helpers in suicide prevention. So I'll go over the topic as what is suicide, the burden of suicide, what do we mean by the ripple effect of suicide, what are the risk factors, what are we thinking of when we say suicide prevention, and what natural helpers are and why is it relevant for today, and what is the first aid that you can do before I conclude. So what is suicide? So it is any death that is direct or indirect result of a positive or a negative act accomplished by a victim, himself or herself, when he or she knows or believes it will produce a result. So basically any death that is caused by the same person to themselves with the intent that they have to die. So suicide in Latin means murder, to murder oneself. So the burden has been increasing, and earlier it was a very rare thing to hear of somebody die by suicide, or maybe it has not come to light, but now it is very common where we keep hearing of somebody who is dying by suicide or who has attempted suicide. So the suicide rates have increased. This is at least in 2010, so we have data even after that. And on an average there is one death every 20 seconds and one attempt every 1 to 2 seconds. So there is so much of help that is needed. And in countries like India and China, it accounts for 49% of global suicides. Almost half of the suicides are happening in our country and China. And LAMICS is lower and middle income countries, where we include Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, including India, China. So there 84% of all suicides happen there. So adolescent population, among girls, this is the topmost reason why people die. Self-harm is the topmost reason, and among boys it's the second most reason after road traffic accidents. So we're looking at a very huge burden and a very huge problem which we know very little about. How many of us are really comfortable in asking or talking about suicide to the other person? So we have a very huge burden there. So the National Crime Bureau 2020, with also the pandemic, we see the rates have really increased, and this was more, when they classified based on the occupation, it was more among daily wage workers, poverty and unemployment being the major causes, and also drug abuse, which Suganya madam was talking about. The drug abuse, the addiction, the family problems are the next other common reasons why people were attempting self-harm. And most of the data about suicide comes from developed countries. But the problem is in the developing countries. So there itself we have very few research which is telling us about actual problem. So in other countries where less of people are dying, we have more data, but more people are dying here where we have less data. But however, with some studies we know some things are common, some things are not common. So in developed countries, both the places, the attempters, people who attempt self-harm are more women, and who complete self-harm are more men. And in India, the rural population attempt more, and higher education status, higher socio-economic status are not spared. There is high rates of suicide among them also, and also by the means of suicide. So in the developed countries, it's more firearm, and in India, it's more hanging and with pesticides, because more rural population is seen. So, and the rates in India, among 900,000 people who die from suicide throughout globally every year, among that 170,000 are from India. This is according to World Health Organization. But what does the National Crime Record Bureau say? That only 135,000 suicides rates are recorded. So where is the rest gone? So one possible reason could be underreporting of suicide because of stigma, because it was criminalized, but now we have the new Mental Health Care Act, which says that it's no more criminal to attempt self-harm. It's a cry for help and no more treated as a legal problem but more a medical problem. But still it continues to be reported, and that's why people are very hesitant. So we still have numbers which we don't know. So there is a huge hidden toll of suicide. We are talking about huge numbers already, and there are numbers who are not reported. So the burden is even higher. So the ripple effect of suicide. So till now what we're talking about were the reported suicides. Now when we go on to unreported suicide, so in a country like where we have 1.38 billion population, there are close to 3 lakhs who die by suicide. So that is reported suicide. So what about unreported suicide? That is 5 to 20% more. And suicidal behavior, that is people who attempt, are 4 to 100 times more. And people with thoughts of suicide is 1 in 20. So 1 in 20 of us is having a thought of suicide at this moment. So think of the huge burden that we have. And people affected by suicide behavior. So one person dies by suicide. How many people are affected because of one person dying by suicide? There are 15 people who are affected. And they subsequently have 65% increased risk of suicide by themselves. So you lose a family member, you lose a friend to suicide, 65% of people are at a risk of attempting self-harm by themselves. And they take about, say, 45 days to 4.5 years to recover. So it's not easy. The mental health burden is also increasing. So suicide is a huge epidemic, a hidden epidemic that we see. So till now what I was trying to tell you is there is a huge burden, and some of the common risk factors. So we should know who are all at a risk of suicide to identify some of them. So common socio-demographic risk factors, like I told you. Okay. So male who die by suicide, male are more common. Among socio-economic status, there is a difference. They say lower socio-economic status is a risk in developed countries, but in developing countries, even higher socio-economic status is at risk. Among urban, rural, there are equal risk in developed countries. In developing countries, rural has more risk. And non-heterosexual orientation, where we are talking about the LGBT community, the lesbians and gay communities, where here suicide itself is a stigma. So do you think people will accept people with different sexual orientation? That itself is a huge stigma, and they are prone to more mental health problems and in risk and subsequently to suicide also. And coming to negative life events, parental separation, parental death, parental mental health disorders, children grow up in such an environment, in such stress, they are at a risk for suicide. And poor parent-child attachment, which in turn happens because of the above reasons, and with a family history of suicide. So there are biochemical level also there are some changes, genetically there are some changes when there is a family history of suicide with the serotonin receptors, so they are more prone for suicide. And when there's marital or family discord that is ongoing, there's interpersonal difficulties, say with friends, say with in romantic relationships, adverse childhood experiences, history of physical and sexual abuse, and even bullying in children puts them at a higher risk. And third category of psychiatric and psychological factors, mental illness is a very huge risk. Addiction, substance use is a very huge risk, and addiction is no longer substance, so other substance also, say gaming and other addictions also are at a high risk of self-harm. And personality factors, by personality each one's independent nature. We won't call it personality, we do call it disorder, but then some personality require much more help than the other, much more support than the other. So borderline personality disorders, people who are very perfect, who cannot accept change, might be at an increased risk. They self-criticize themselves, say people who are very anxious, that particular person didn't talk to me because I'm not good enough. So self-criticizing people, and people are very impulsive. They just think of something, they don't worry about consequences and do something. Like people who speed vehicles, people who binge drink. So those kind of people are impulsive people where something that they're not happy about happens and they immediately try to do something without even thinking about consequences. So their attempt of suicide or self-harm can also be very impulsive. So this is another high-risk category. And in general, people with very low self-esteem, that they continue to feel I'm not good enough, or I'm not achieving enough, or I'm not very valuable to my parents or friends. And poor problem solving skills, because all of us today face problems, but how do we solve them and move around is very important. So when problem solving skills are a challenge, and hopelessness, where you feel that there is nothing more than this, and there is a mismatch between aspiration and capabilities. Nowadays all of us want to do everything, looking at social media, looking at our friends, looking at what our friends portray in social media. Whether they're really happy or not, we don't know, but what they portray on social media, we also want to be that. Whatever film stars want to be, we also want to be that. So you aspire to be something, but you're capable of only so much. So it's very hard to accept that way, and that makes you feel that you're a failure, and that might be a risk of self-harm. So we're not looking at one isolated factor leading to self-harm. It's more biological, where there's a family history, psychological factors that we discussed, like the mental illness, the substance use, the personality factors, and past history of self-harm. So all this puts you at a risk. All this, not only all this, but also along with the current life situation or event that is happening. So maybe recently you had an exam that you failed, or something happening at home that's upsetting you, or you fought with your friend, or you fought with your boyfriend or girlfriend. So all that's making you upset. So that only leads to from no thoughts of suicide to thoughts of suicide, because one person suddenly one fine day doesn't attempt self-harm. So there are a lot of things that the person is undergoing, which might not be on the limelight, but they might be processing themselves. So these factors might lead to thoughts of suicide, then lead to some amount of planning about what they can do, and then preparation before they attempt a suicide behavior. Sometimes we are successful families, successful in helping them live maybe with harm, or we are able to reverse some things completely, or unfortunately we lose some people to suicide also. So how do we prevent this? So I think this levels of prevention, in previous speaker had also discussed about universal selected and indicated. This is common to all kinds of all illnesses. So universal prevention is where we are decreasing the risk factors by itself, and selected prevention is you're identifying the at-risk population and trying to help them, and in indicated we are doing interventions for survivors, so who have died, who have attempted self-harm, but we are lucky enough to save them and we are trying to help them. So universal prevention, where we are targeting the entire population, what can we do to modify some of the risk factors of suicide? So we can work on, the community leaders can do some work for us, healthcare workers, as healthcare workers we can do something, and what media can do, because all of us are glued to media now. It's become an inherent part of our life. It's very hard to separate Even if 5 minutes my talk is going to be boring, automatically you all are going to look at your phone. So we are so glued to media, so that is also, media also plays an important role in our whatever measures that we take nowadays. So what can community leaders do for us? Maybe probably increase the financial support they give to mental health services, because like I told you, directly suicide is not an isolated problem. They go through a lot of distress before they do that. So maybe when we are able to catch them there, we might be able to help them. So by increasing the financial support for mental health services, it becomes accessible to everybody. And in general, targeting some of the general risk factors, like if they have proper education or employment and the economy improves, there we are helping a few people. And legislations on drug policies, because the addiction is a very, very high risk factor for self-harm, where sometimes people are really hesitant about attempting, and somehow when they consume alcohol or some drugs, they are under the influence of that, and somehow they feel that they have the courage to do it, which they really don't mean. Even otherwise they might not have attempted. So, and media, by increasing public awareness, not to sensationalize suicide about why they died, how they died, like giving more importance to what were the circumstances around that, that's not going to really help anybody. So, not to sensationalize suicide, but rather disseminating information about sources of help. So when they're thinking about that, what can they do? Presenting actual facts and reliable information about the problem, and to publicize more about warning signs rather than really telling people about how it happened, why it happened. That happened because they ran out with a boyfriend, or that happened because she had an extramarital affair, which is not really going to matter. That person is already gone. So talking about that, gossiping about that is not going to help us anymore. But what do we learn from that person's self-harm? So later on, when my friend or I have thoughts of suicide, what I can do, if media can educate us about that, it will be more useful. So this can also be a very important universal prevention that media can help us with. So the universal prevention can also start in school. Just like substance use, there are some skills that can be taught in school. Again, improving the overall coping, the problem solving skills, the life education, the life skills, we can help them cope better. And limiting parental aspirations. So all of us are running behind marks, scores. So I think we should look at more personality, character, how they are, what kind of people they are getting along with. So that is also important to know as parents. And also making the education environment more safer and child friendly, where the school or college is also not running behind marks. And constant surveillance by teachers. So most of the places, most of the colleges and schools have mentors, where when we face with difficulties, you can go talk to them, and there are facilities for that in most of the places. So otherwise, not just your mentors, but whoever you are comfortable with, who you feel that you can be helped by that person, it's important to go to them. So. And in general, in the community, family support, counseling services, where maternity and old age, these are also vulnerable population, and generally strengthening community groups. It can be religious groups, it can be social service groups, where people know that when they have difficulty, not just about suicide or thoughts of suicide, even before that, when they have a general risk about some tension about work, where they just can generally go talk and sort out some help for them. So these are levels of universal prevention. Now going to selective prevention, where we're looking at a particular high-risk population which we can help. So high-risk group and treating them. This is more focused on psychiatric disorders and substance use disorders. And because mental health professionals are few, we can train primary care physicians and nurses and other healthcare workers to help us with this, so that they're not forced to go to a step where they have to attempt on their lives. So identifying some of the high-risk groups, socioeconomically deprived groups, adolescents, our topic today, and recently married women, chronic disorders. In elderly, even constipation is very worrying. There are so many people who attempt self-harm for constipation, because that is a chronic problem which they're not able to live with. So chronic disorders, alcohol or other substance use disorders, and their families. So not just the person who is consuming alcohol or other substance, even their families are at high risk. And previous history of attempted suicide, very, very important, and individuals and families with mental illness. So all these are high-risk groups where we catch them at this point and try to help them so that they don't go on to the next step. So this is the risk factors that we already discussed, where in the high-risk factors, the psychiatric and the psychological factors are something that we can help in this category. The indicated prevention, the last category, are intervention for survivors, where we try to avoid further attempt of suicide in survivors of suicide attempts. And for every committed suicide, there are 20 suicidal attempts at least. So at least if we catch them in that one of the suicide attempts, maybe this suicide wouldn't have happened. So there we have a very important job to play. And highest risk factor for suicide is a past history of suicide attempt. So that's why this category of indicated prevention becomes important. And there are 15 to 30% of people who reattempt within the same year. So the initial period is very, very important. Not that they are free of any risk after that, but at least in the initial period when we can intervene, it becomes important. So what do we do for people who have attempted self-harm in the hospital? So now most of them, they come to hospital. Some people with stigma don't come, but if they are in the hospital, they are assessed and admitted, take a detailed history and look at the psychosocial factors, what has led to the self-harm and further management, a suicide contract to be drawn, and depending on the situation, in case needed, if patient is very aggressive or again wanting to attempt, we can even sedate and restrain them to ensure utmost care. And after care, when they are discharged, regular follow-up, family members also to be involved so that we can educate them and make them adhere to treatment. Keep them in the treatment net to understand whether they are responding to treatment and whether they feel helped even after the attempt and after the intervention that we are giving them. And there are non-pharmacological, not always we give medication. Some people it's acute distress, and when that problem is settled, they feel much more comfortable. And some people feel relief after an attempt also. They feel much more relieved and they feel it's a second chance that they've got. So non-pharmacological measures, counseling, cognitive behavioral therapy also becomes very important. So coming to our topic specific, so I give you a background about why we are doing all this, but now talking about natural helpers, why do we need this category of natural helpers? Because suicide is a preventable cause of death, and like I already told you, there is one death every 20 seconds and one attempt every 1 to 2 seconds. And it's an individual decision. A suicide attempt, not always that a family makes a suicide pact and they attempt together. Most of the time it's an individual's decision and only that person can reverse. But however, another human being, it can be a friend, a family, a volunteer or a professional who can help prevent it. So that's where we are looking at whether we can be of some help to that particular person in distress. But unfortunately, there's a huge imbalance. The professional help available is very minimum, but the burden is very high. So what do? That's where natural helpers come in place, because most of us, we don't have human resources for professional help. So natural helpers are people who aren't professionals, but they're expert listeners. And they can attempt and help them to figure out a way by just talking to them, and they can be referred for further management. So not always when we do first aid. So somebody falls and say, you are not trained to do a dressing or sutures. What do? We just give them a first aid. You just clean the wound, you just put a dressing over and then send them to the hospital. So most of us are trained in giving when patients with cardiac arrest, we give them CPR. But are you expected to perform a cardiac surgery on them? No. It's just a first aid. You just give them a first aid and then refer them. But that by itself can prevent them from going to that verge, because not everybody is comfortable directly going and talking to a professional. So if you make them comfortable and give them the first aid, then refer, probably that will be more meaningful, and that person you might even stop them from doing that. So not always we are successful, but at least sometimes we are, and at least those lives should leave us with the contentment that we worked to do something. So why talking to nurses about being natural helpers? So general qualities of a nurse, people are very hard. Nurses are expected to be hardworking, they're knowledgeable, they're curious, very good communicators, they're optimistic, compassionate, empathetic, flexible, and they have a lot of emotional stability. So these are basic qualities of a nurse, and I'm sure you will be having some of them, and most of you all will be having some of them. So natural helpers also are expected to have certain qualities. Not everybody is comfortable talking about things to everybody. So say in a classroom of say 40, 50, there will be one person or there will be 5 people who always people go to for help. Why do they go to them? Probably maybe they're good listeners, they're very empathetic, they try to understand, maybe they try to help, they are confidential. So maybe there are certain reasons or certain qualities why we all approach only that 4 or 5 people. So there might be say 10, 12 teachers, but everybody goes to 1 or 2. Why? Because you feel that they can help you, you feel that they can understand you. So there is a huge correlation, there's a huge overlap between qualities of a nurse and the qualities of a natural helper. So nurses as natural helpers, because they are exposed to a high-risk population, the vulnerable patient population, and also they are a high-risk population themselves. So they are trying to help a lot of people. There is a lot of burnout. During the COVID time, they had to work for hours. As such, medical field is not very easy and very nice like how it looks from the outside. It has its own hardships. So nurses are exposed to a high-risk population and they are high-risk themselves. So both ways help might be needed. So what is nurses' roles with patients and caregivers as natural helpers? Why this is important is they're the first point of contact. So a doctor visits the patient, say inpatients or outpatients, doctor sees them for say twice a day, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but most of the time who's there around the patient? So there's always nurses around whose patient directly calls, even for small things or big things. So nurses are the first point of contact. And they are exposed to the high-risk population with chronic ailments, repeated hospital visits, comorbid substance use, elderly with constipation, etc. The high-risk group is always there they're the first point of contact. And also they are exposed to caregivers with grief. So we see patients who are dying and probably as doctors we certify and we leave. Sometimes some doctors take time to explain to the relatives. Sometimes we give them some time to emotionally express, but most of the time, over time, the nurses will be so connected to the family that the family also will be talking about how does it feel to see somebody dying or somebody losing somebody. And there are nurses who have come to me unable to bear the death of the patient, that they tried so hard and the patient is no more. So they suffer themselves and they try to support the family who suffers also. So nurses' role with patients and caregivers, so they can be natural helpers there. So what is the role of a natural helper? So being able to recognize the warning signs of suicide. I'm talking about suicide in particular. So recognize warning signs of suicide. Learning confidence in their ability to help others. So where they gain some confidence that, okay, I can help others. And information, they have some resources and information centered around mental health and learning when to refer patients for appropriate help and being familiar in ways of taking care of their own mental health and taking care of others. So this is the important role of natural helpers. So whatever we discuss now, the important role is to identify, give them first aid and refer. You are not expected to do everything. Just to identify a person with the problem, help them just postpone or help them to handle the situation at the moment and refer them. So suicide first aid is, there are 3 important steps. 1 is to recognize and ask the person. 2 is to listen and explore. 3 is to set up a coping plan with them. So this are the important 3 steps that you can do as a first aid. Just like CPR has so many chest compressions to so many breaths, these are the steps for suicide first aid, which every natural helper, which can be any of you, have to know, because all of us are very uncomfortable around topic of mental health. We're very uncomfortable around topic of suicide. If somebody has suicide, why should I go talk to them? Maybe it will increase their thoughts of suicide. Maybe I'll push them to attempt suicide. Or if I know that they are with these thoughts, what will I do? What can I do? If I tell the family, they'll get upset. My friend will get upset that I told the family. She wanted me to keep this as secret. So all of us are so uncomfortable and clueless about what we have to do. So I will try to brief you about what you can do when you see a person going through this. So most of the people thinking of suicide or attempting, or who've already died by suicide, don't want to die. It's actually a cry for help, and they feel so helpless that at that point they don't know what to do. So they feel everything, all doors are shut. Maybe there is no solution to this problem. Maybe I cannot do anything. So their intention is actually most of the times not to die. But they are forced or they're pushed to that situation, not by anybody else, but by their own mind or maybe their own situation, the way they perceive the situation. So how can we help a person in emotional pain? So like I told you, it's not a one simple decision where a person jumps and attempts self-harm, but there are various stages where there's feeling of hopelessness and despair. There's thoughts that life is not worth living, maybe it's not good enough to live. I wish I was dead. I want to die is an active suicidal ideation. Making plans, okay, let me run away from there and probably jump from somewhere or go in front of the train or take this poison and die. So having plans of what to do, attempting by itself, and there are unfortunately some people who we cannot help who die by suicide. So there are various stages in which we can help people. We can catch them at various steps. So what are some of the warning signs that you can recognize in people? So current suicidal ideation, intent and plan. Suicidal ideation is maybe I can do this to die. Intent is I really want to do this, I really want to kill myself by hanging. Plan is I bought a rope, I know where the fan is, maybe I know where to attempt, I know what time to attempt, maybe my friend won't be in hostel, or maybe I know I'm alone in the room. So making plans for it and having ideation about that. And verbal and written statements about suicide, death and dying. So nowadays you see a lot of WhatsApp status and Instagram status where you see why this person has kept this status. Maybe life is not worth living. Maybe only death can answer everything. Or maybe it's better to be quiet, and they might give you some indirect pointers. So if it's your friend or somebody, when they have such a status, you can ask them. That is also a warning sign, because they are trying to seek for help, where they are not confident enough to come and directly ask a person for help, but they're indirectly showing some signs here and there, and we have to be smart enough to pick that up. And dramatic changes in behavior or personality. Suddenly there are people who stop taking baths, they don't talk to anybody, they're so withdrawn, or suddenly they become very happy. They were so dull and they become very happy, they start thinking that it's their last days, they want to enjoy so much. So when you notice a change, that is again something to be questioned. And symptoms of depression, where the three important symptoms are feeling low most of the time, and having lack of interest in most of the activities, and lack of energy. These three are cardinal signs of depression, along with other signs where they are not able to sleep, not able to eat, thinking of everything seems negative, not talking. So all those are signs of depression. Preoccupation with death and suicide themes, maybe in their status, movies, watching those kind of movies, and giving away the prized possession, their most important books, toys, or whatever they want to give it to other people because they feel that they can no longer enjoy it and they might as well give it to other people. And increased use of alcohol or drugs where they try to relieve the pain themselves. So these are the important warning signs of self-harm that we will have to see and recognize. So when you see all these warning signs, what do we do? So does asking about thoughts of suicide increase the risk of suicide? Any answers? Yes, no, maybe? Yes? Okay. So asking about suicide increases the risk of suicide. So how do we ask them then? I heard a lot of yes, so if at least one of you can tell me, then how do we ask them? Any idea? I hear some feeble voices, I'm not able to. Okay, the answer is no. Then how do you ask them then? So we're discussing about so many things, and if you don't even ask them, then how will they tell you? Already they don't know how to come and tell you. So actually a person who's in so much of despair and hopelessness, they'll be waiting for somebody to come and ask. Do you feel okay? And I noticed all this in you. I don't think you're okay, but you don't seem okay. So they're waiting to be asked. And when they say that, yeah, I'm feeling dull and I don't feel like living, then you have to ask them, so do you get thoughts of suicide then? It's very important to use the word suicide and ask them. So there are so many people who say that, I just want to be there and I wish I was 70 and I wish I die. That is okay, wish to die. But are you thinking of suicide? Are you thinking of suicide? Are you thinking of ways of suicide? Or things seem very difficult at your end. How are you managing? Sometimes people with these kind of thoughts, these kind of pain, also feel that it's not worth living, and they sometimes think of suicide. Have you ever thought about it? And when they say yes, please don't make different faces so they stop talking. They've taken so much courage to tell you, yes, I feel that. You don't have to start crying, or you don't have to start saying, oh my God, then that's gone. And they've taken so much courage to tell you. Okay, so you react in a calm and composed way. So asking about suicide is not going to increase the risk of suicide. Okay, so rather than pointing fingers, you have to give hand to help them. So after identifying and asking them, what do? We listen to them. So show that you're taking time to listen to them. So when they say yes, then what is it? What is happening? Why do you feel like that? You make them talk. Okay? Give them a chance to talk you through things and what's been happening with their life and why do they feel like this. And most important, all of us in this world want to give solutions. Nobody's asking you for solution. Okay? Nobody in your friends, his or her life might be totally different from what your life is. So nobody's asking you to give solution. You just have to listen. Just listen to that person. You just say that I am there. I'm here to listen to you. We'll see what we can do. That's the kind of statements that you have to say. You can even say so that that person knows that you're listening. You don't have to talk. You don't have to jump to give solutions to that person. Okay, that's the most important. You could have done this, you could have done that. Maybe that person tried everything and that still doesn't know what to do. Okay, so don't offer solutions, just listen. And help them that now is not the best time to make a major decision. So even to live or die, death or life, that's a very major decision. So maybe it's not the right time to make a major decision. So this is the most important thing, because immediately when a person is thinking of suicide, or you catch a person who's attempting self-harm, you go into the room, somebody's trying to hang. You cannot make them live. You cannot immediately tell them, okay, don't do all this, come. You can take them from that place, but don't try to convince them to live. Just convince them to take a pause. Maybe you don't decide this or that. Maybe we can talk. Maybe we'll see how we can figure out things. Maybe somebody else can help you. So those are the kind of things that you have to tell that person. Okay? So most important thing is to pause. And then the third step, coping, trying to make a plan for them, because their thinking and thing is completely gone. They're not able to think of any solution. So maybe you can help them figure out a plan. You're not going to give the solution. You're questioning them and trying to figure out a plan. So you have to keep the conversation flowing while you discuss these important elements. One is aloneness. Maybe the person is alone. You cannot leave them again separately. You have to ensure the safety of that person. So aloneness, what are we doing for the coping plan? The emotional pain, how are they going to handle it? Whether they want to go meet somebody professional, whether they want to take a break, go home for some time, whether they've had plans of suicide, and whether they've already bought something, can we keep them safe by taking care of those things? And prior, whether they have attempted, whether there was suicidal behavior, alcohol and other drugs, are they in place? Because you discuss with the person and you leave from there, no? So you have to ensure the safety of the person before you leave. And last is mental health. So whether you can help them do something as a friend, or as a nurse or as a professional, what you can do about it. So these 6 elements are 6 important elements where you should make them form a rough plan as to what we are going to do. So this is also a part of the suicide first aid, because if you just stop them and leave from there, there's a high chance that they will do. So you have to talk out what you're going to plan and how you're going to help them. Okay? So help them protect against any threats to their safety, and ask them to repeat back and write down what you've suggested in the coping plan. And finally, help them make connections with other people who can support them, because you cannot be there all the time for that person. So their partnership working becomes important. So we have a lot of, luckily in India we're not as isolated as abroad. We have families for our support, at least most of the time. So at the informal sources, so when you know a person who is doing this, probably connect them to informal sources that can be family, friends, neighbors, their community groups who are helpful, or their formal resources, like there are helplines, there are or primary care physician or a specialist, or in their workplace if they have any mental health support available, directing them to that, because at the moment they are not able to think of anything where they can do. That's why they've come to that point where they're attempting self-harm. So helping them figure out a plan is very, very important. So there are some helplines which are there for Tamil Nadu also, where people can approach and take help. So the 3 important steps, reminding you again, is to recognize and ask, listen and explore, and make a coping plan. Then after that, we refer them. So again, we looked at the first category when nurses are exposed to a high-risk population, and the next one is nurses are a high-risk category themselves. Why? Because the reasons you already know. It's a very demanding field. They have to interact with multiple doctors, high level of responsibility. They're dealing with critical patients, very anxious relatives most of the time, exposure to emotional and physical danger. So they might need support also. So the support, I'm talking as natural helpers who can be peers who support you, your fellow nurses who can support you, your fellow students who can support you. Okay, that 5 people or 10 people in your class who you feel comfortable to go and support. And when that 5-10 people are trained a little, so they'll be able to support you better. So it is natural, why we're looking at peer support, it is natural to talk with peers before we talk about it to other people. And they can talk about their concerns without any fear of judgment, and they can begin to come to terms with their feelings and then access support at a professional level. So this is nurses as natural helpers for their peers. So again, the role of natural helpers is to identify, give first aid, and finally refer. So I think the most important thing I wanted to convey in this session is to know the first aid and to know what to do when somebody asks you for help. So to conclude, suicide burden is very high. Suicide is the most preventable cause of death. Professional help currently available in India is very minimal. So nurses, being the first point of contact for a huge vulnerable patient population, can be the natural helpers. With minimal training, they can be very good natural helpers which will help to reduce the burden of suicide. And it's also important that they protect their mental health in the process of caring for others. Thank you. Any questions? I know it's lunchtime, but any questions are welcome.
Thank you, ma'am, for your valuable presence and your encouraging words regarding the natural helpers, suicide preventive strategies and coping ideas like crisis management and healthy decision making, and to overcome that hopeless situation. Once again, thank you so much, ma'am. Here the token of love. Now I would like to welcome our respected principal, Dr. S. Madhavi, to honor our chief guest, Dr. Srinidhi Nityanand, with token of love and certificate of appreciation. Thank you, ma'am.